Well, good morning, everybody. And good morning, panel. Thank you for being here this morning. I think that initially, starting off with our speaker, who spoke regarding TSA and the awesome mission that the DHS has in protecting the homeland and transportation security sector, is a good lead into what we're going to talk about this morning. And I know that our panel has various expertise in these areas, and so I'm thrilled to be able to sit here with everyone this morning and talk about it. And Goutam, I'd like to start with you, if I could.
Sure.
And what I'd like to ask you is, can you tell us a little bit about facial recognition technology, and talk a little bit about what efforts you've made and what it is that's going on in the field right now, where the research is headed.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Facial recognition is what I believe, and especially in airports, is you've got to be able to assert your identity in commercial aviation. And the minute you walk into an airport, when you check in, when you do your baggage drops, when you go through TSA, when you go through CVP, you do an air exit, you're always asserting yourself. You always have to prove that it's you. And you do that with either your driver's license or some government-issued document, your passport. And with the emergence of new collaboration and new technologies and new processes, we've been able to do that in an automated fashion with your face. Mm-hmm. Your face becomes your passport, your face becomes your driver's license, your face becomes a way for you to assert your identity. And that's what we're trying to explore here and implement at the airports, of course, with a lot of collaboration between our partners.
And some of the things that our former speaker spoke about with respect to the private-public partnership, you've decided to do this in-house.
That's right. Last year, of course, with Mr. Wagner's team, we were looking at a way to kind of meet the exit compliance needs, air exit, where every international passenger, as you probably know, there's a congressional mandate so that they can be verified when they leave the country. And being the CIO of 2 airports where we have a lot of international passengers, both Dulles and national, we were looking for a very quick solution. We were in the market doing a lot of research and finding out that the products that we had, and don't get me wrong here, there's some very good products, but they just were not meeting our needs. They were over-engineered, they were really expensive. Maintenance nightmare from a CIO's perspective because you have e-gates and a lot of contraptions. The gates at Dulles and DCA at National not really conducive to bringing in all this physical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So we decided, let's go ahead. I have an extremely talented team, an innovation house in-house that we built several years ago, 5 years ago. Our talented engineers decided to kind of build something, and within a week or two, we worked very closely with Mr. Wagner's team, and that's a level of collaboration that you're probably going to be talking about and probably seeing in this industry today. Is we all share the same vision of air travel. We worked very closely and we built a prototype. And we decided to build a prototype that could work in any airport with any airline. And to do that, we took an iPad. And we built an app around an iPad. iPad could be anywhere from $399 to $1,000, and build an app. It runs on cellular, it runs on Wi-Fi. It's with one charge. You can run it for 11 hours. You can put it on a stick. You can take it to any gate. If airline A has a 90-degree boarding process, it works. If it has a straight boarding, it works. So we tried to build that prototype. Of course, we work very closely with CVP and all of our other partners. And within a couple of weeks, we tried it out. Mm-hmm. And to all of us, we were kind of very excited about it because this is completely disruptive. It did not require any of these other over-engineered solutions. It was a very simple solution. So within a couple of months, we were able to deploy it, and ever since, I've been in these talking engagements.
Mm-hmm. I wonder why. It's not popular. Well, that's funny. And you know, this is a perfect segue, John, to actually talk to you and ask you. And thank you, by the way, for joining us on stage.
Sorry, I'm late. We went to the wrong place.
That happens all the time, trust me, particularly in DC. You know, but you know, in Goutam's discussion about the whole, you know, the biometrics and the facial recognition. Can you maybe talk first of all about the CBP's exit and entry mission and talk about how that relates back to the technologies and where it can actually lead to in securing the homeland and making it safer for all of us who travel?
Sure. And, thanks for having me. But, there's been several congressional pieces of legislation which require DHS to collect biometrics from departing visitors. And, we've never really had a departure control process in place in the U.S. And, we didn't build our airports to accommodate that. Unlike a lot of countries around the world where you see an immigration or a border control officer and get your passport stamped to leave the country, we've never had that. So there was no easy place to inject a biometric collection process. And DHS struggled over the years with trying to figure out a way to do this, which wouldn't be confusing or wouldn't create gridlock at the airports. And they tried some things with standalone kiosks, which worked if you could find them and you had the time to go and figure out how to use it. Some handheld things, either at the TSA checkpoint or with CBP officers out there in the boarding area. But nothing really became feasible. And we took this over in my office around 2013. And we took a look at, well, what are the tools we've already got? What are the information we've already got? What are passenger behaviors? What's their expectation at the airport? What do they already understand they have to do? And how do we leverage what some of the airlines and airports are already doing with thoughts around biometrics and self-service and automated processes? And what we ended up building is, rather than take our typical government stovepiped approach that this is my requirement and I've got some money from Congress and I'm going to go out and purchase 1,000 of these things and nail them to the floor and make everybody go behind it and walk through it. I mean, we can impose that on the transportation system, but that's not the right way to do this. And the lessons we've learned over the years with global entry and automated passport controls and the advances we've made in a lot of the automation, we sat down with a lot of our partners and devised a solution where the government already has all this information. We've already assembled a gallery of photographs. We've already got it from passport records and visa records. And the true value of the biometric becomes not so much accessing additional law enforcement databases about people, because we've already got that. It's about pointing to a record that we're already going to rely on to make a decision about a person as to whether they need further inspection or not, and it becomes the different pointer to that same information we're already relying on. So by looking at it that way, you could use the convenience and the ease of just taking a photograph in a time and place where people are already presenting a physical document or a physical token, and we could take that photograph and run it only against the gallery of people on that flight. So it's one to a very, very small many, so it becomes very quick and very accurate. And we can provide this service, which we've already got to do for the biometric exit requirement. But if we open up those capabilities, say, to our stakeholders and say, hey, if we can confirm an identity in 2 to 3 seconds without having to read a token of any sort, what could you do with that? Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the ingenuity and creativity of the airports and the airlines are coming out, and the technology companies out there to say, hey, let's build a bigger, easier, more intuitive process for people and make travel really easy. And by combining all these efforts, rather than us all building our independent systems, right? There's already enough gauntlets to go through to get on board the aircraft. Could we start to combine those and do one simple biometric collection and everyone share that information or the results of that information? Mm-hmm. And that's what we're building here. And what we're seeing is it's very easy, very intuitive, very accurate, and people are enjoying it. Mm-hmm. And the airlines are seeing the efficiency in boarding the aircraft, and in some cases, it's cutting the boarding time down in half. Mm-hmm. And we're really seeing the ease of use. And where the government, we don't want to prescribe how this should be done. We offer the capability, and then depending on the logistics of the airport or the needs of the airline, they can devise what solution works best. Is it a simple iPad on a stick? Yeah, that works. Or a big fancy gate that opens and closes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that works too, mm-hmm. Right? So it's a matter of just turning the capability of it to the real experts and let them figure out the nuances of how it works.
Mm-hmm. And it certainly appears that it does work, and it seems like the higher reliance on technologies, although we all realize that technologies also have some of their pitfalls as well. it does make it easier. And I know that men in the audience probably travel quite extensively internationally. I travel to Asia quite a bit, and I can tell you that I love global entry. I just, when I come back in the United States, I just look into a monitor and I'm good to go. And I look at everyone else that's standing in line waiting to get in, so I'm a proponent.
It's going to get even easier too. We're going to take global entry. We're going to get rid of the fingerprints. We're going to switch it over to facial recognition.
Yep.
We've got to figure out the logistics of this, but the idea is if you've got nothing to declare, of course there'll be a big sign, you promise you have nothing to declare. It'll be as simple as just walking out the door.
Right.
And it'll be that quick. We just got to figure out the logistics and how to do that within the airport.
And this kind of goes back to what Goutam was talking about as well with respect to the in-house development, because the user sees the need to develop a technology, so you're doing it within your own expertise, but you're working with Customs and Border and working with TSA and other federal agencies to initiate your process.
That's right. And then airlines too. I mean, even though we started building this with an air exit need, the compliance need to get biometric validation when you leave the country, we soon shifted on to the airlines. And airlines started seeing that, well, if we can connect the customs database to do the biometric photographic validation, and then connect it with our airline departure control system, then I've already validated the identity. Now with that token, why can't I board? Do I really need a boarding pass? So we started working with several key airlines, and we've really made that happen right now. So with JetBlue, and we're working with United and American and Air France and SAS, we've been able to kind of get this one scan of your face that does the validation of your identity with CBP. And then at the same time, you can board without a boarding pass. So we call it the official death of boarding passes.
Right.
That would probably be a good thing. And actually, this is a great segue to talk, Jonathan, about the biometric rally. Tell everyone what the biometric rally is, what it entails, and what the vision and the purpose of it is.
Sure. Let me explain. Science and technology, if you didn't know. We're the research and development arm for DHS. So we serve all the operational components. So their priorities, and Mr. Wagner is one of our big customers, are our priorities. And so we look at common problems across the operational components and invest R&D to help make those things happen. So here we're talking about seamless trade, seamless travel, and that's what we want to do. That's what we want to get at, because this is a partnership not just between with the federal government and our security aspects. This is industry. This all impacts our economy, and so it has to be a partnership. So biometrics is one of those things that we're looking at cross-cutting. CBP has requirements, OBM, ICE, Coast Guard, and so this is a heavily invested area for us. And so once a year, we like to do biometric rallies, and I think a lot of people know him, but Arun Murray, he's our #1 expert. And so we have a Maryland test facility here where we do an RFI about once a year, and we open it up and we put problem statements out. This year, we're looking closely at facial recognition. That's, and we're always looking at iris and fingerprint scanning, but facial recognition and biographic and demographic improvements is what we're looking at this year. But we set up scenarios, and it's basically a warehouse based off of our customers' ConOps, or concepts of operations, and we have everyone come out and test their capabilities, and then we have our customers come out, TSA, CBP, ICE, and Coast Guard, to look at these capabilities and see what they can do. Because a lot of times, there's COTS out there that we can buy, and my particular job, I'm trying to get things out and fielded within 3 years or less. And I'm pushing on the less side. So I want to see things that are very mature that we can just sprinkle a little R&D on, like you said, and where my customers can actually afford it too. And that's very key in the DHS environment versus, for example, DoD. We don't have those size of operational maintenance budgets, so we have to have affordable solutions. So that's why it's critical to have these partnerships. But that's the biometric rally in a long answer.
So again, it's taking the need of trying to find the most expedient way to allow passengers and travel, to simplify in many respects. Because I think all of us remember, where we were on 9/11, and remember that prior to 9/11, really the only screening was you just showed your ID, or rather, you didn't even show your ID, it showed your ticket, and you went right to the gate. And it's all changed, of course, we all know since then, that's obvious. But utilizing biometrics and utilizing the testing environment that allow Goutam and allow, like John, for example, to test these areas, it makes the actual passenger experience that much better. Isn't that the goal for all this, is to improve the passenger experience?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think if we go back to our keynote speaker and talk about some of the things that she said, is that most Americans' viewpoint of TSA are the blue shirts that are out on the line doing all the scanning and the checking of the people coming through. But it's much more than that. It's much more than that because it involves the science and technology. It involves the public-private partnerships, which again are all critical items. So, and what I'd like to do now is Chris has asked you, where do you see the technology going with respect to facial recognition technology and the use of biometrics? Where do you see it going in, say, in the next 15 to 20 years?
Well, I think on the, so we've seen certainly major advances in facial recognition. We can all admit to that. And the technology itself has become accessible to the consumer. When you look at Amazon Web Services recognition and some of those platforms, it's really opening up R&D to a broad swath of people that couldn't necessarily do it before. So when you consider where facial recognition is going, I have to think that you're going to be, and biometrics, you're going to see I think a far greater push in open architectures, the sharing of that data across various domains. Not just within DHS, but across law enforcement, et cetera. I think you'll see long-term development of data lakes for searching and building additional analytics off what is collected within the bounds of privacy, et cetera. And in terms of biometrics itself, I think people are certainly becoming more and more comfortable with that as an enabler. I think part of it has to do with the adoption of the iPhone and Touch ID. It's kind of your fingerprint is now your pass into the world of the phone and all the apps and everything else that it provides for you. So I can see biometrics extending not just across with certainly all the more transportation use cases, but extending into autonomous vehicles and being an enabler to allow consumers to travel both within cities and municipalities.
So I mean, and this kind of begs the question, because we talk about, and here in the panel we've discussed the technology, and I'll just ask this openly to the panel to discuss. Do you see any security concerns with respect to biometrics of travelers? Do you see any chance of it being hacked or gotten into or being sold on the black market or on the dark web? Do you see any security flaws that could perhaps threaten the use of biometrics? Anyone on the panel?
No, certainly.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, and if you can think of it, I mean, just think about, this is how I like to think about it. Just think about what technology can do, and think about how somebody could reverse it to use it nefariously. And that is the reality of the situation. We have TCOs, we have people that want to do bad things. And in some cases, it's part of their business investment. So absolutely, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of those TCOs and those nefarious actors, bad actors, on how they can, what their motivations are, and then it will help us reverse engineer and prevent that. So,
well, I'm glad to hear that there is a preventative effort going in. And Goutam, when you're building your software, you're setting up your iPads to do like the example you stated earlier, what kind of a security in terms of background security do you think threatens the use of that tool?
Well, you're right. I mean, in our case, in this specific example of what we just talked about, we got to look at the entire the transaction. It's not like a piecemeal to it. You got to take all the precautionary measures of how you do your handshakes. In our case, there is nothing that is sent that identifies a person. it's all encrypted. So even if you hack it, it's a bunch of ones and zeros and random numbers, and you're not going to make out that it's person X traveling on this flight, and sitting on this seat. So everything is very well encrypted. The handshakes with our databases of record, in this case, is the travel verification system. It's done in an extremely industry best practices. That's how we kind of maintain the security of this entire ecosystem.
And John, this is back to you with respect to the facial biometrics. How does CBP see securing that information on in your servers or in the cloud or wherever you would store that? How concerned is CBP? Let me state it that way.
I mean,
of security.
we're always concerned about that, but again, this is data we've already got. This is data we're already using. The facial biometric is just a pointer to it, right? So it's data we're already going to make a decision about, but rather than query that information against a physical read of a passport where it sends your name and date of birth through the system to identify which record belongs to you, it's just sending a picture that's now associated through the other picture of what that information is. So the information we put in the cloud is a templatized photo from your passport. So again, it's ones and zeros, and there's a unique identifier associated with that. So if somebody were even to hack into that, what are they really going to access? And really that's the way we'll look at it. Now we'll protect that, of course, and we have the secure connections with everyone. But again, it's just your picture coming and matching and then coming back into CBP where the real data is kept.
So, I mean, there are certain points going to be exploited. And it was interesting in the green room, we were talking before coming out on the and doing our panel discussion and talking about how intelligence plays a role. And just as in federal government and just as in our federal agencies, and a lot of us are former military, the bad guys, so to speak, have an intelligence gathering arm as well. And they're always trying to exploit loopholes and how to probe. And I think that's been a concern, not just with facial technology, but with any general technologies that exist out there. Well, let me ask the panel this question. What role do you see higher education in preparing our young men and women who get into Customs and Border Protection or get into the TSA as a career? Do you see an increase in their capabilities, or, just kind of an open, broad question?
Cybersecurity.
Right on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be one of our number one priorities going forward. We have to have the capability in-house, and we have to have the capability in-house to use it and also to prevent it.
I think I agree. I think cybersecurity is important, and the way I see this evolve, the new emerging technologies, and I think Mr. Wagner said this very eloquently. It's not one entity building a solution. It's going to require a lot of new levels of collaboration between different organizations, both in the private sector and in the public sector. So while in this case, Customs and Border Patrol has a set of standards for photographs, private entities, quasi-government entities, airports are all going to be working with the government entities to do this handshake, which means that we need a lot of workforce to kind of build those application program interfaces, the connecting between two organizations to make sure that we're not breached, the secure handshakes are always taken care of. So there's always going to be a need for new talent in that space because there's no other way to do it.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I think that the talent recognition and what's available, the people who are available to come into the career fields, I think that a lot of us out here that have, have worked in the federal government or been in the military, gone to the private sector, realize that, there is opportunity, but we also have to, encourage our folks that are, in university to attend and participate. Chris, what do you think?
Well, I think, when you look at the workforce and the changes across industries taking place because of automation, for example. So I would argue that over the long term, that's going to change a lot of the TSA and CBP and the workforce, their responsibilities and what they contribute, right? So I think you're going to see a lot more replacement of kind of rote processing tasks, as we've talked about facial recognition and then adding on context in terms of that. You may have fewer people actually certainly doing pat-downs and inspections and questioning and letting software take care of a lot of that. But then the people that remain are going to have to be a bit more focused in terms of maybe doing more psychological analysis or more probing questions or what have you. So I think the role of the workforce is going to change. We have to be prepared to retrain our people for that adoption.
Completely agree with that. You know, one of the things, and I would just say that, you know, public-private partnerships are really important, you know, in all levels of government. And American Public University, where I am a dean, we actually have a robust private-public partnership with TSA and DHS right now in a higher education program, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But you can't overemphasize the importance of the private sector and how they can become a force multiplier, because they're not perhaps as restricted as government, particularly with budgets, because we all know what a budget reality is, and we know that we have limitations. And oftentimes, not oftentimes, really, most times, the innovation occurs in the private sector. It occurs, you know, where people are, you know, tangling or dealing with a, you know, maybe a concept, and they've got the best latitude to develop not just technologies, but perhaps ways of meeting it. John, what about you and the education route? What are your thoughts?
No, and this program, you know, is a great example of how it's really disrupted across internally our organization. Mm-hmm. And it's everything from the IT long-held notions that you got to keep everything in a single physical data center, to people that understand the cloud and the flexibilities that brings you and the efficiencies that can bring you. And you look across even at the procurement and the acquisition processes aren't designed for public-private partnerships. You know, they're designed for the old government think of, you know, I've got a requirement, I go through a standard procurement and a standard process, and I buy 1,000 of these things, and then I install them, and here's my nice, clean, neat schedule on how to do that. You know, if I'm working with 100 airlines and 100 airports, they've got their all deployment processes, budget requirements, their own process. They've got to control. We've got to be flexible enough and patient enough to allow that to work through. And they show the value of working together with this, but the government doesn't own all the endpoints that are going to drive this system. And, you know, our procurement people get nervous and they go, oh, if you don't control it and you don't own it, that increases risk. I said, no, it doesn't, because he's got to board the aircraft. That reduces the risk, right? Because I know that system has to be up all the time or that plane can't take off.
Yep.
And I can leverage the expertise of the airport and the airline to make sure that flight's going to board on time and it's going to leave on time, and our biometric exit requirement's going to get met a lot better than just us trying to do it on our own.
Right.
So we need people with the expertise, the flexibility, the modern thinking, you know, not being scared of a public-private partnership. It's okay to talk to the private sector.
Right.
You know, they're not all out to get us.
Thanks.
You know,
Appreciate that. I'm friendly.
you know, but like you mentioned, the expertise they can bring to us, we can learn about things. And then from the officer perspective, and I'm glad you mentioned this too, is, you know, when you go through our inspection process, it's still very manual, very scripted. You know, there's still a bunch of steps, and the officers are sitting and typing in information in the booth. And, you know, this program will change a lot of that, and it'll really modernize how we conduct inspections. We still feel there's a need and a role, a very significant one, for the CBP officer. And what do we train, and what's our expectation of that resource? And, you know, the technology is great. It can automate a lot of the procedures, a lot of the things you have to do. It can match you to an identity document, but really it's the human being that judges a person's purpose and intent of travel. And that's the piece that we've got to focus our workforce on, to pick up on signs of deception and the intuitive style questioning. In a way, it's almost the way we used to do it before we had any technology. And, you know, you'd look people in the eye and ask them, you know, what are you bringing back from your trip? Why did you go? Who were you there with? You know, what was the purpose of your travel, or where are you going in the U.S.? And combining that information we're gleaning from those few questions, thinking of the next few questions to ask, and what is the system telling us about, you know, all the things the database can tell us, and really making a very quick split-second decision on, do we let this person go, or do we check further into these things? And so it's building that innate sense of just intuitiveness and creativity into that. You know, what risk does this person present, and how would they try to trick me? So how do I counter that leveraging the technology, not being replaced by the technology, but piecing it all together so we make the right decision about a person.
Great point about leveraging the technology. You can't ever replace the officer. And just as a quick aside, in 2010 when the Haitian earthquake happened, I was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force and deployed to South Florida as one of the receiving hubs, which is where our 130s were bringing in casualties from Port-au-Prince from Haiti. And we worked very closely with Customs and Border. Now, there wasn't really any technology out on the ramp. When these 130s were coming in and dropping the ramps and we were taking the casualties off, we had CPB officers with us, essentially doing, just a spot check to make sure that people were, in fact, wounded. They were injured, which they were, but that shows you how serious the mission is for CBP, and it's not a matter where you can just deploy 5 or 6 officers. It may require a task force of officers to come in and make it safe. So I'm glad to hear you talk about you can't replace the intuition of the officer. Totally agree with that.
And we see a lot of countries just go into a gate, and if you match your passport, you walk right in.
Right.
But it tells you nothing about the risk assessment or threat or purpose or intent of travel.
Right.
And other than global entry, we're still going to speak to every single person that comes in, even if it's just a couple of questions. Mm-hmm. And we feel that the efficiencies we can gain from the automation using the facial recognition and the other technology, we'll be able to handle the continued increases in international travel. Mm-hmm. I mean, it went up another 4.8% last year. Wow. We're up 35% in the last 5 to 6 years, and this year's tracking just as high, which is great for the economy. The rest of us struggle with the size of the airport. The airlines and planes are getting bigger, and the lines, and how many people can you get through the system?
Right.
But we feel there's a lot more efficiency we can all eke out of this by doing this.
Well, it's interesting because we're going to talk to Scott here shortly about airports and about some of those large airports and how they operate, and looking forward to hearing that. But what I'd like to do before we have time for a few questions, I'd like to ask Chris the last question, if I may. And I hate to put you on the spot, but what, in terms of what we have discussed today, this morning rather, with technologies and with where we're headed in terms of biometrics and the threats that they pose, also the security side, what role does the private sector ultimately play in assisting government in developing and housing these technologies? Easy question, right?
Well, speaking for my little slice of the private sector only. So obviously, you hear a lot about the private sector, public sector partnerships, and having been in the Department of Defense and the intelligence community, that's a big theme there too. It's a critical theme. As we do our research at Noblis, and I'm sure our peer companies in the same vein, it's so critical for us to understand the exact challenges that you all face and other elements face, so that we can address them appropriately and know where to align our resources. So that kind of open dialogue is very helpful, so we know where to invest or where not to invest in this general area. I think when you look at we haven't really talked too much about AI and machine learning in this vein. I think those are those areas you're going to see enormous investment. I think obviously we're seeing it now.
Right.
DARPA's budget has grown significantly in that space. Mm-hmm. Countries like China certainly have invested enormous amounts of money in that, and you're in kind of an arms race.
Very much so. I agree with that.
And so when we're applying our resources in that area, speaking specifically to transport, it's really around specific challenges. One of those, for example, is detecting high Z-related materials that may not fit a coherent shape within a cargo container or luggage, but are there things that we can do to better identify shapeless, hard to discern threat components. So one area that we've been exploring, for example, is voxel neighborhoods to help better determine if a component may not align to a certain shape, for like a gun or a missile or a knife, etc. Mm-hmm. But taking that pixel and suspending it, for example, in a three-dimensional matrix, giving us a better view and context of what that actual piece of the image is. Again, when training those algorithms, you're looking at needing large data sets. So that's another area where we focus, where we can set up a CRADA or another opportunity to share data with a government partner to help us in the research context to solve their problems. That's extremely helpful to us, of course. In this particular case, when you're looking at cargo X-rays, for example, you're still looking at not enough data to get going, so you're building data augmentation pipelines to strengthen that. And so, I guess, when I think of the partnership space, it really comes down to understanding specifically what the mission challenges are and having that open dialogue between ourselves and our partners.
All very important things. Well, we've got about 10 minutes, and what I'd like to do is ask if there are any questions in the audience, and if you would just tell us who you are, where you're from, and then which panelist you'd like to ask the question to. Right here.
David Winks with AccuSite. A general question for the panel. Since most of these systems rely on power and telecom to communicate back and forth, and the sensors themselves, how are you looking at hardening the sensors and the power systems and telecom so bad guys don't have a remote off switch?
Great question. Panel, what do you think?
Well, I can get a start.
Awesome, you're the man.
Really good to see you.
Yeah.
It's the same risks as today, though.
I think so.
Right?
It's the same risk that you have today when you walk up to and take your driver's license out. How do you know that your co-passenger is not peeking in and looking at your credentials in your driver's license or your passport? So in this kind of a setup where there's a lot of an electronic handshake, we've got to take those precautions to make sure that only that information is visible in an encrypted fashion. So we take all those security best practices and isolate information so that no one can see what they're not supposed to be seeing. Everything is done through a very secured cloud connect. That's how we kind of do most of these handshakes in this world of digital getting us together.
I'd say one thing we're seeing is wider adoption of software-defined networking technologies, right? And so that allows a certain element of recombinatorialism in how you change and reconfigure your infrastructure. So that lends itself to a kind of a moving target, moving defense kind of aspect, and find certainly far more granular controls to defend your infrastructure and change it at will to counter the adversaries. Sure.
Jonathan, what do you think?
So it goes back to my point of red teaming, right? We have to set up red teaming to, what do we need to harden? What do we need to encrypt more? What are the bad actors trying to get out of us or trying to exploit our systems for? So red teaming is huge.
Red teaming is really important in JRTC. We call it the OPFOR. And they're always trying to probe you and try to figure out how to get into your perimeter, physical perimeter, but the technology perimeter is a far different set of circumstances and challenges. It truly does. Next question, anybody? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, panel. My question is, my name is Renee Ingram. I'm with Diversified Enterprises Group, and we represent a manufacturer in California that manufactures perimeter intrusion detection systems. And I was wondering if the panel could address where we are with R&D and funding in the government for technology of this type for airports, for maritime security, and for ports of entry or border protection.
Well, Jonathan, that's clearly your lane.
Sure. And so did you say you were doing container security?
No, we're doing perimeter intrusion detection.
Perimeter intrusion.
So
okay.
It would be fencing, fencing.
Okay, that's kind of part of our, and John, you're an expert at this, but we have a CTPAT membership program because it's all about taking security precautions, not just at the point of stuffing, but throughout the transit all the way to the point of destination. And of course, when it gets to the border, we're very much interested in what happened in between. But having that perimeter security up front is very, very important to us, and we have this CTPAT membership, and it goes up to tier 3, I believe. And that's part of those public-private partnerships that's very critical and key. And so that helps us with information, and also gives us a level of security that precautions and measurements are taking place. John, do you got anything?
I mean, there's always a need for better ways to physically secure either the ports of entry, the airport infrastructure, the secure sites within those facilities, because they are open to the public, but the public doesn't get access to, the runways, the tarmac. Although we did have a guy jump out the door yesterday on a plane, and we had to chase him across the tarmac. But these happen. People hop the fences and try to get in, and some have bad intentions, some people are just crazy. But we were always looking for better systems to be notified sooner, right? We don't want the passengers going, hey, why's that guy running across the runway out there, right? Ideally that alarmed when the guy first hopped the fence. So yeah, we do need a lot of help with those systems, and you just see the public incidents over the last couple of years. We can do a lot better on this.
Well, I would like to, first of all, thank the panel this morning for joining us and discussing these critical key items. And I believe that we all have a lot to learn going forward. And I think that the salient points for me out of this is public-private partnership, sharing intelligence, hardening our critical infrastructure, and continue with the R&D. And with that said, I'd like to thank everybody. Thank you, panel.